She was gone for 3 days. And when the police finally opened that door, what they found inside didn't just shock the town. It haunted even the officers who had seen everything before. Because this wasn't just a missing person case, it was something far darker. And the most disturbing part? Someone knew exactly what happened from the very beginning. This story starts in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing like this ever happens. The kind of place where neighbors wave, kids ride bikes until sunset, and doors are sometimes left unlocked without a second thought. That's why, when 7-year-old Emily Carter didn't show up for work on a Monday morning, it didn't immediately raise alarms. People thought maybe she was sick, maybe she took a day off, maybe she just needed a break. But by the second day, something felt off. Emily wasn't the type to disappear. She was predictable, responsible, the kind of person who texted back instantly and never missed a shift. Her coworkers started calling. No answer. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By day 3, her younger sister Megan drove straight to Emily's house. And that's when things took a turn. Megan later told police that the moment she pulled into the driveway, her stomach dropped. Emily's car was there, but the house felt wrong. The front door was slightly open, not wide, just enough to notice. Megan stepped inside, calling out her sister's name. Silence. No TV, no music, no movement. Just a strange stillness that didn't belong in a home that was usually so full of life. She walked further in. Emily's purse was sitting on the kitchen counter. Her phone charger was plugged into the wall. A half-full glass of water sat nearby. Everything looked paused, like Emily had been there 1 second and gone the next. That's when Megan called 911. Police arrived within minutes, and from the very beginning, something didn't sit right with them either. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no overturned furniture, no clear indication of a struggle. But experienced investigators know something the average person doesn't. Sometimes, the absence of chaos is the biggest red flag of all. They began processing the scene carefully. Fingerprints, footprints, anything that could tell them what happened in those missing hours. But the house wasn't completely untouched. In the hallway, one officer noticed faint marks along the wall, scuff marks, as if something or someone had been dragged. That's when the tone of the investigation changed. This was no longer a missing person case. Now, it was something else. Detectives started digging into Emily's life. At first glance, everything seemed normal. She worked at a local marketing firm. No known enemies, no recent arguments, no financial trouble, no reason to just vanish. But when they spoke to people closer to her, a different picture slowly started to emerge. Emily had recently broken up with her boyfriend, Jason, and according to friends, it wasn't a clean break. There were arguments, tension, late-night calls that ended with tears. One friend even mentioned that Emily had seemed scared, not terrified, but uneasy, like she was trying to convince herself everything was fine, when it wasn't. Police brought Jason in for questioning. At first, he seemed cooperative, calm, composed, maybe a little too composed. He told detectives the breakup had been mutual, no hard feelings, no drama. He claimed he hadn't seen Emily in over a week. But then, something didn't add up. Phone records showed that Jason had called Emily the night before she disappeared. Not once, but 5 times. And not short calls either. Long conversations, stretching late into the night. When confronted, Jason's story shifted slightly. He admitted they had talked, said he just wanted closure, said it didn't mean anything. But detectives noticed the hesitation, the small pauses, the way his answers changed just enough to raise suspicion. Meanwhile, back at the house, forensic teams made another discovery. In the bedroom, hidden beneath the edge of the bed, they found something small, but critical. A single drop of blood. Not enough to see at first glance, but enough to test. And when the results came back, It was confirmed. The blood belonged to Emily. Now, everything changed, because people don't just disappear and leave blood behind. That meant one thing: something violent had happened inside that house, and someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. Police returned to Jason. This time, the questions were sharper, more direct. They pressed him on his whereabouts, his movements, his timeline, and slowly, the cracks began to show. He couldn't keep his story straight. Details didn't line up. And then, one detective asked a simple question. "If you haven't seen Emily, how do you explain this?" They placed a photo on the table, security footage from a neighbor's camera. A blurry image, but clear enough. A figure walking toward Emily's house late at night, wearing a hoodie. But the build, the posture, the way he moved, it looked a lot like Jason. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. And that silence? It spoke louder than anything he'd said before. But even then, they still didn't know the full truth. Because what happened inside that house was far worse than anyone imagined. And what police would uncover next would shock everyone involved. Jason sat there, staring at the photo like it might somehow explain itself. But it didn't. And neither did he. The room went quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like something is about to break. One of the detectives leaned forward and spoke calmly. "Jason, this is your chance to tell us what really happened." Jason exhaled slowly. His fingers tapped against the table. Not loudly, just enough to show the pressure was getting to him. He shook his head, said it wasn't him, said the footage was too blurry, said they were reaching. But the confidence he walked in with? It was fading. And the detectives could see it. Because here's the thing. People can lie with their words, but their body almost always tells the truth. While Jason tried to hold his story together, the investigation outside that room kept moving forward. Police expanded their search. They went beyond the house. They checked nearby streets, alleys, and wooded areas. They spoke to neighbors again, this time asking different questions. Not just, "Did you see anything unusual?" but, "Did you hear anything?" That's when one neighbor mentioned something strange. Around midnight, the night Emily disappeared, they heard a loud thud. Not a scream, not a crash, just one heavy sound, like something hitting the floor. At the time, they ignored it. But now, it meant everything. Back at Emily's house, forensic teams decided to take a deeper look. Not just the obvious places, but the ones people hope no one checks. They brought in luminol, a chemical that reveals traces of blood, even after it's been cleaned. They turned off the lights, sprayed the floors, and within seconds, the truth started to glow. Faint at first, then unmistakable. There were traces of blood leading from the bedroom into the hallway. And then they stopped, right near the back door. It was as if whatever happened ended there. Or at least, that's where it left the house. Investigators now had a clearer picture. Emily didn't just disappear. She was hurt, inside her own home. And then she was moved. But by who? And where? That question brought them right back to Jason. Because while he was sitting in that interrogation room, something else surfaced. His phone data. Not what he said, but what his phone revealed. Location tracking placed him disturbingly close to Emily's house that night. Not just in the neighborhood, but right outside. Around the exact time the neighbor heard that sound. When confronted again, Jason's calm demeanor cracked just a little more. He tried to explain it away. Said he drove by, just to check on her. Didn't go inside, didn't knock, just drove by. But that explanation? It didn't sit well. Not with detectives, and definitely not with the evidence. Because now, they had three things: the calls, the footage, and his location, each one pointing closer to him. But still, no body. And without that, Jason thought he had room to breathe. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, like he had decided to stop cooperating. But what he didn't know was that investigators were already one step ahead. Because earlier that day, while Jason sat in that room, police had obtained a warrant to search his car, and what they found inside changed everything. In the trunk, hidden beneath a blanket, they discovered something that didn't belong. A small stain. Dark, barely visible, but familiar. They tested it, and just like before, it came back as blood. Emily's blood. Now, the story Jason had been telling, it wasn't just weak. It was falling apart completely. Because there's no explaining that away. Not anymore. Detectives walked back into the interrogation room. This time, they didn't ask questions. They placed the evidence on the table. Photos, reports, proof. Jason stared at it. His jaw tightened. His eyes shifted. And for the first time, he looked scared. Real fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes the truth is no longer something they can control. One detective spoke, slow and direct. "We know you were there." Silence. "We know she was hurt." Still nothing. "And we know she was in your car." That's when it happened. Jason's composure finally broke. Not in a dramatic way. Not yelling. Not crying. Just a long pause, followed by a quiet shift in his posture. Like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. He rubbed his face, looked down at the table, and whispered something so low they almost didn't catch it. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Those 7 words, they changed the entire case. Because now, it wasn't about if he was involved. It was about what he did. But even then, what he said next didn't make things clearer. It made them darker. He claimed it was an accident. Said they argued. Said things got out of hand. Said he panicked. But here's what didn't add up. If it was an accident, why clean the scene? Why move the body? Why lie for 3 days? That's not panic. That's calculation. And detectives knew it. They pressed harder, asked him where Emily was, over and over. But Jason hesitated. And that hesitation, it told them something critical. Wherever Emily was, it wasn't somewhere easy to find. And whatever he did next was planned, carefully. Because people who panic don't cover their tracks this well. But people who think ahead, they do. And that meant one thing. This case wasn't just about what happened in that house. It was about everything that came after. Because somewhere out there, Emily was still missing. And Jason was the only one who knew where to look. What police would discover next would be the most disturbing part of all. Jason kept his eyes on the table, avoiding everyone in the room. That quiet confession hung in the air. "I didn't mean for it to happen." But detectives weren't interested in half-truths. Not anymore. One of them leaned in, voice firm but controlled. "Jason, where is she?" No response. Just silence. And that silence started to feel intentional, like he was choosing what to say and what to keep buried. Minutes passed, then more questions. Some result. He admitted something had happened, but refused to say where Emily was. And that changed everything, because now this wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about time. Every hour mattered. If there was even the smallest chance Emily was still alive, they couldn't afford to wait. Search teams were deployed immediately. They focused on places connected to Jason, his apartment, his workplace, anywhere he had been in the last 72 hours. Dogs were brought in. Drones scanned wooded areas. Officers went door to door again, asking if anyone had seen his car late at night or early in the morning. And then, a small detail surfaced, the kind most people wouldn't think twice about. A gas station clerk, about 15 miles outside town, remembered a car matching Jason's. Late at night, the driver looked nervous, kept looking over his shoulder, bought a bottle of water, and nothing else. But what stood out wasn't the purchase. It was the mud The car was covered in it. Thick, wet dirt along the sides and tires, like it had been driven somewhere off-road. That tip gave investigators a direction. They pulled traffic cameras from nearby roads, tracked the route, and slowly, a pattern emerged. Jason had driven out toward a rural area, an old service road, barely used anymore, surrounded by woods, isolated, quiet, the kind of place where no one hears anything. Search teams moved in. The terrain was rough, uneven ground, dense trees, patches of soft earth, perfect for hiding something or someone. They spread out, scanning every inch. Hours passed. Then one officer noticed something unusual, a patch of ground that didn't match the rest. The soil looked disturbed, not naturally. Recently, they called it in. Everyone gathered. And in that moment, you could feel it. That tension, that knowing, because deep down, they all understood what they were about to find. Shovels hit the ground, slow at first, careful, then faster. Each layer of dirt revealing more of the truth Jason tried to hide. And then they stopped. One of the officers froze, because there it was, a piece of fabric, partially buried, familiar. They kept digging, and within minutes, the search was over. Emily had been there the entire time, hidden, alone, miles away from the place she felt safest. Back at the station, Jason was told they found her, and for the first time since the interrogation started, he reacted, not with denial, not with anger, but with something else, relief, a small exhale, like a weight had been lifted. And that reaction, it said more than any confession ever could, because it meant he knew exactly where she was all along. Detectives went back in. This time, there was no more patience, no more soft approach. You buried her. Jason closed his eyes, didn't argue, didn't fight it, just nodded slightly. And that was it. The truth was no longer hidden. But what still didn't make sense was how it all happened. Because Jason kept repeating the same thing. It was an accident, over and over. Like saying it enough times would make it true. He claimed they argued in the bedroom, said Emily pushed him, said he pushed back, said she fell, hit her head, and didn't get up. That was his version. But investigators weren't convinced, because accidents don't usually come with cover-ups this precise. They went back to the house, reviewed everything again, this time looking at it through a different lens, not as a disappearance, but as a crime scene with intent. And that's when they noticed something they hadn't fully understood before. The scuff marks on the wall. They weren't random. They followed a pattern, a direction, from the bedroom toward the back door, like someone had been dragged, not carried, dragged, which raised a critical question. If Emily had died instantly from a fall, why move her like that? Why not call 911? Why not try to help? The answers pointed to something darker, something more deliberate. Forensic reports added even more weight. The injury to Emily's head, it wasn't consistent with a simple fall. It suggested force, blunt force, stronger than what Jason described. And suddenly, his story started to fall apart again, piece by piece. Because this wasn't looking like an accident anymore. This was looking like something else entirely, something intentional, something violent. And the more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Jason wasn't just hiding what happened after. He was hiding what really happened in that room. And the truth behind that moment was worse than anyone expected. What he did before Emily hit the ground would change the entire case. Jason sat there, his story unraveling with every piece of evidence placed in front of him. What once sounded like an accident was now surrounded by contradictions, and detectives weren't letting up. One of them slid the final report across the table. Autopsy results: cold, clinical, precise, but devastating. Jason, this wasn't a fall. He didn't look up. The injuries don't match your story. Silence. They show repeated impact. That word hung in the air. Repeated. Not once. Not a mistake. More than once. Jason's breathing changed. Slower. Heavier. His hands clenched together. And in that moment, it became clear. The version of events he had been holding on to wasn't just incomplete. It was false. Detectives leaned in one last time. This is your chance. Tell the truth. Seconds passed. Then Jason spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet voice. Stripped of everything. We argued. A pause. She said she was done. For good this time. Another pause. I lost it. Those 3 words carried more weight than anything else he'd said. Because now, it wasn't about confusion or panic. It was about control, about anger, about a moment where he chose not to stop. He admitted they fought in the bedroom. Admitted he grabbed her. Admitted things escalated. And then he hit her. Not once, but multiple times. Each word slower than the last. Like he was finally facing something he had tried to bury. Just like he buried her. He said when she fell, she wasn't moving. And instead of calling for help, he stood there, thinking, processing, deciding. And that decision? That's what defined everything that came after. Because he didn't call 911. He didn't try to save her. He chose to cover it up. He cleaned the scene, wiped down surfaces, tried to erase every trace of what he had done. Then, under the cover of darkness, he carried her out, put her in his car, drove miles away, and buried her like she was something to hide, not someone who mattered. That was the truth. Raw. Unfiltered. Final. The case that started as a missing person report ended as a calculated act of violence. Jason was arrested and later charged with murder. In court, prosecutors laid out everything. The calls, the footage, the blood, the attempt to hide it all, and most importantly, his own words. The defense tried to argue emotional distress, tried to frame it as something that spiraled out of control. But the jury saw through it. Because actions after a crime, they tell you exactly who someone is. And Jason's actions spoke clearly. The verdict came back guilty. And just like that, the man who tried to control the narrative lost all control of his own future. But even after the trial ended, even after the sentence was handed down, there was something that stayed with everyone who followed this case. It wasn't just what happened. It was how quickly everything changed. 3 days. That's all it took for a normal life to turn into something unthinkable. And maybe the most unsettling part of all is how ordinary it looked from the outside. A quiet neighborhood, a familiar face, a relationship that seemed normal until it wasn't. It makes you wonder, how many warning signs do people miss? How many moments get ignored? Until it's too late. Because stories like this don't start with violence. They start with small things. Tension, control, fear that's easy to dismiss. Until one day, it isn't. And by then, there's no going back. If this story made you think or made you feel something, take a second and share your thoughts below. Do you think this could have been prevented? And if you want more real stories like this, stories that show what really happens behind closed doors, make sure you subscribe and stay with me. Because the next story might be even closer to home than you think.